The damage that doomed the Titanic was not one giant gash, a chain of narrow openings across 6 compartments. Each puncture was about the size of a sheet of paper. 1,500 people died through holes that small. Here is the strange part. No one has ever photographed that damage. It lies buried beneath the seabed mud. But in 2022, 2 robots sank into total darkness and began photographing everything else, every plate, every boiler, every rivet. The wreck lies 3,800 meters down in permanent night. Every photograph ever taken was a flashlight beam in a cathedral. The robots belonged to a deep-sea mapping company called Magellan. Their names, Romeo and Juliet. Their mission, 3 weeks of round-the-clock survey. They captured 715,000 photographs, millions of laser measurements, 16 terabytes of data without touching the wreck even once. Stitched together, the images became something new, a full-scale digital twin of the Titanic, accurate down to a single rivet. For the first time in over a century, researchers could walk the whole ship in daylight and read it like a crime scene. 2 years of analysis followed. The first clue was a single steam valve on the stern, frozen open for 110 years. An open valve is a small clue, and an extraordinary one. It suggests steam still flowed through the ship's systems as the stern sank. Deeper inside, the scan found boilers dented inward. Steel bends that way for one reason, which means someone was still feeding those furnaces long after the ship was doomed. The survivors always said so. Now the steel agreed. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell and his engineering crew stayed below in the flooding ship, working the boilers and dynamos for over 2 hours. Every minute they held on, the lights stayed lit and the wireless kept calling into the dark. Picture loading a lifeboat at 2 in the morning. Now take away the lights. Panic in the dark kills. The engineers bought light and bought time with their own lives. All 35 of the ship's engineers died that night. For a century, their story was testimony, memories from people in the boats. The lights stayed on almost to the very end, and the men who kept them burning never came back up the stairs. But the digital twin had more to say. This time it spoke for a man history had accused of abandoning his post. First Officer William Murdoch commanded the bridge the moment the iceberg appeared. He ordered the turn. The turn came too late. For decades, stories claimed Murdoch abandoned his station at the end. A blockbuster film went further, showing him doing something far worse. In his Scottish hometown, the accusation stung so badly the film studio issued an apology. But an apology is not evident. The answer waited on the starboard boat deck in a piece of machinery called a davit, the crane that lowers a lifeboat. In the enhanced scan, the davit at Murdoch Station stands upright, cranked into launch position, ready to swing another boat out. You don't rig a lifeboat for launch if you've fled. Murdoch was working the boats when the sea rose over his station. That matches what Second Officer Charles Lightoller swore all along. Murdoch was swept away trying to load one more boat. 113 years later, the davit can't say how Murdoch died, only what he was doing when the sea arrived. That's the pattern of this wreck. The steel keeps siding with the witnesses and against the legends we built afterward. Which leaves the deepest mystery, the wound itself. And the first man to describe it accurately never saw it either. The bow speared into the seabed, burying its wounded flank deep under the mud. But in 1912, naval architect Edward Wilding did the math from flooding rates alone. About 12 square feet of openings, scattered, not continuous. A wound smaller than a doorway, on a ship nearly 300 meters long. For a century, that calculation waited for a test. The test came from University College London, where Professor Geomke Pike's team set out to sink the Titanic again inside a supercomputer. They fed it the original blueprints, her recorded speed of around 22 knots, and the scan's wreck map as their anchor to reality. Then they replayed the collision over and over until the simulation matched every fact the wreck and the survivors agreed on. The result overturns the disaster movies. There was no long gash, only a glancing blow. The iceberg barely touched her. It left a chain of small punctures along the starboard hull, each about the size of a sheet of A4 paper. Punctures that small should have been survivable. She could float with 4 compartments flooded. The simulation shows damage across 6. Each opening let water in slowly, a bleed, not a flood. The supercomputer agreed with the man from 1912. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, the ship seemed almost fine. Decks level, band playing, half-empty lifeboats pulling away in the dark. The margin was 2 compartments, a few meters of glancing ice. That explains why she sank. It doesn't explain how she died. In the movies, the Titanic snaps in two almost cleanly, like a pencil. The wreckage scattered across the seabed tells a different story. Researchers gathered the scan images of hull fragments strewn between the bow and stern and reassembled them like puzzle pieces. The pieces show no clean break. The steel was wrenched, twisted, ripped apart. The tier ran straight through first-class accommodation, cabins that had been the most luxurious spaces afloat, shredded in her final second. Then the halves fell. Nearly 4 kilometers of black water, minutes of falling, trailing coal, furniture, and shattered steel the whole way down. They landed over half a kilometer apart. The bow speared into the mud, upright and almost dignified, as if she had simply parked. The stern spiraled down like a falling leaf and hit the bottom as a ruin, a tangle no scan can fully unknot. The scan also caught one intimate trace of the collision itself, a cabin porthole with its glass shattered, likely broken by the iceberg. Survivors always claimed chunks of ice tumbled into cabins as the berg scraped past. There, in the glass, was their receipt. Piece by piece, the twin has been confirming the people who were there. So one question remains: why did this have to happen now? Here's the secret deadline behind the whole project. The Titanic is dying. Iron-eating bacteria are consuming her, rivet by rivet. Sections of railing have already collapsed. Every year, more of the ship sags into rust that crumbles at a touch. One day, this century, the most famous shipwreck on Earth could be a stain of iron oxide on the Atlantic floor. But the 16 terabytes will not rust. The digital twin holds the ship at one moment, forever sharp. And it holds answers we haven't found yet. Future researchers will walk this data and notice things nobody has noticed. That's what the resurrection actually proved. Not just how the Titanic died, but that the people in her final hours told the truth. Engineers at their posts, an officer at his boats, a wound the size of paper. The evidence was waiting. We just needed light.